are back with Dr. Linda Tello here on The Infinite Way with Enolia. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Linda Tello here. And we are going to continue with part 2 of our interview series with Dr. Tello telling us about the Kiro. So I would love to start with one knowledgeable or piece of knowledge that the Kiro give, Dr. Tello.
One of the most favorite things, and this was actually Ruben's mom when she was down in Tucson at a training that I attended, she said something that really allowed me to open my mind to have a new perspective. And the teaching she gave was very simple. And she said that in the Karo cosmology, the Karo traditions, there's no such thing as right or wrong. An event, the way it is perceived by someone, it's a matter of their relationship to the event. So if somebody, let's say, and this was interesting too, because I was listening to a different, he was a channeler, he channels fifth dimensional entity. And this entity was also talking about love and fear. And he was talking about, and very similar to the Karo, where let's say, for example, someone kills someone else. I know it's kind of an extreme example. We have people in comments going, what are you talking about? But we can liken it even to our own, like the American military and things like that. And they were talking about how it's all perspective. And I'm not saying like someone just going out and killing someone just, because they feel like it, but it's more in the event that if someone is defending something that they love. So then an act of potentially killing another human being can be perceived as an act of love if the killing would be for defending, say, somebody's family or defending the country. It depends on the, on the rank of what it is you're defending. So in and of itself, people may say that the act is wrong, but if it's in a circumstance of self-defense, that's an example, kind of an extreme one, but it's one that really had me thinking, because I hadn't really thought about the act of killing someone, which is usually, if you just look at it just in its own little box of killing, is bad. But if you look at it from a perspective of someone is defending their family or defending something they love or defending themselves, and then the act of killing happens, then that's kind of an idea where they care, like, it's not good or bad, it's relative to the situation. So I thought that was interesting, because then I was able to take that from like this larger extreme, of killing, to smaller everyday things, and I'll give you an example that I struggle with here in Albuquerque a lot, because unfortunately here in Albuquerque where I live, there's a huge homeless population. Mm-hmm. And so there are days when I do have like some cash, or I just happen to run into an individual and they're asking me for, some money. I don't usually carry cash. My parents always get mad at me. I'm a credit card and plastic girl. So if they're by the store with me, or near the store, and they want something to eat, I'd be like, hey, I can just get you some food. I don't have any cash, but I can do that. And then other days, like most of us these days, we're on a budget, making sure we make our ends meet. And then sometimes I realize, yay, I've got all my ends meeting, and I don't want to overextend myself financially to be able to help someone else. It's not that I don't want to feed them, but it's like, or provide food. But I recognize that there are many times when I do, offer to buy something, or I have some cash, the day I need to buy a lotto ticket or something, because I actually have cash. And then I have done that. And other days, what I realize, the best that I'm able to do in that moment is look in my heart and offer them compassion. So I've had to learn for myself to not judge myself and be like, oh, Linda, but I'm so blessed, and I am, and I'm very grateful to the universe for that. But I have to remember that simply because I've been blessed for, whatever karma work on this lifetime I've done that's allowed me to have the resources, it doesn't mean that I'm responsible for feeding everybody else that wherever they are in their journey. So I've had to look at that situation and not feel that I was bad or that I was being selfish for not offering to every single person, because I've had to also come to realize that I can't do that. That's why there's a lot of us on this planet. So each of us has to do our part. So for me, that's like a smaller version. It's like, it's not good or bad if on the one day I'm not able to give more than just a recognition of the harshness of an individual situation and then give out compassion. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not bad if I can't give out a tangible thing to help them. So I've learned not to judge myself if the only thing I'm able to give in that moment is a recognition of their situation. And then on the days when, I happen to have a little more resources, payday or something kind of deal, and I'm able to give a little more, then I can do that. So I've learned to look at the intention, because I think that's the other thing that I learned very much from the Caro. It's what is the intention behind your thought, your words, your actions, so I recognize that for the most part, I'm human like anybody else. It's like my intentions are always to support the journey of the other individual to reach their highest self, and some days I'm better at it, some days, I mean,
Sure.
I'm more in the human space as opposed to more the spiritual space.
Yeah.
So I've learned to allow myself to have that flow of my own spirit, my own being, and not judge myself if I'm not always able to be at the highest spiritual vibration for someone else.
Right,
Allow
right.
myself to have that.
So when we were together last, we talked
Mhm.
about the video ethnography project. We talked about the website project and the Kiro being the first to have their own business, their own tourist business. And we left off with you taking the Kiro to see their own ancestral sites, which was beautiful, beautiful journey. So here it is. You've gone through these iterations. You've gotten to know the Kiro so intimately, their family. And now here you are looking at the hardest problem that they face. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that problem?
Yes. So the biggest problem that the Caro have at the moment is water storage.
Okay.
They, according to Ruben, and I believe Barnaby as well, they do not have traditional knowledge around water storage. And I asked Ruben, I'm like, how is that? And he said, because they had never experienced this before. There was always plenty of water. So they didn't need to have specific water storage traditions per se. I mean, the Inca are known for like all of their water systems and all of that, but if you notice, the majority of them are it's flowing water. The water's moving.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm
The
kind of
snow caps on the mountains have
yes,
melted at an excruciating rapid time frame, and so that ice cap melt isn't there anymore.
exactly. Yeah, the glaciers are getting smaller, so there's less water. But when I went to Caro, and I was walking around the mountain with them, I noticed that in a lot of places I felt like I was walking on a bunch of wet sponges. And so what I realized was that there's not necessarily water shortage. It's the ability to capture and utilize the water that's there in a way that's usable for the animals and the people. That's the challenge, because there's a lot of water, but when it's stuck underground or it's underneath, like it's like these mossy patches that when you're walking on them, it's like, is the ground going to sink because it's so saturated, and I remember seeing that when I was up on the mountain with the Caro. There were a lot of sipes, a lot of spring heads around there that were, it just, water was just coming out of the side of the mountain, and I was looking at that and I'm like, isn't there a way that we could capture some of this water and utilize it? Because as I was walking by the Rio Chuela. I think I got it right. So, which is sort of like a small river down the side of the mountain, and that water flows fast. That's like, I would hate to fall in there because it just seems like one of those water log rides at like Disneyland or something. That water is flowing fast.
Right.
But what I noticed when you're at the higher part of the mountain, it sort of like steps down, and the way that the natural formation of the stones are, it's kind of like you have these small little areas where there are pools and the water flows, and other pools. So it kind of reminded me, I'm from the Maryland area, so the C&O Canal, people can look that up. They have all these locks, and the locks actually would work like the opposite way. They would lock up different sides of the canal, fill a specific area with water that would raise the boats, and then the boat can go up, basically go uphill. Mm-hmm. So this was like the opposite. So it reminded me of that, except going down, and the water just kept flowing, and there was no stopping the water. But I thought about it, and I was like, if we could potentially create like a small dam, block some of the water, so when there's less water flowing during the dry season, you're creating these pools along the way. So you're not changing the natural flow per se, because during the wet season the water can still flow and the water's still able to keep moving, but it'll allow the people to have like these small pools. So that was an idea that I had.
Could you share with the audience what problem you were solving though? How was it impacting the Kiro community directly?
Yeah, so the reason that I was thinking about that when I went up there was because Ruben had shared that many of the alpaca were dying. So they have on average about 2,000 alpaca at any given time. But during the dry season, they were losing about 500 of their alpaca. So if they've got 2,000, that's a quarter. You're the math person, you can check me on that. No, yeah, that's 25%. They were losing 25% of the alpaca. And when alpaca are the main food and income source, if you're losing 25% of your food and income source like every single year, that's a compound loss over time. And that's going to shrink down the resources that the Karo have, and eventually it would impact the survival of the community. So I went up there to visit the community and also to become familiar with the terrain, to understand the challenge that Ruben had mentioned with regard to, we don't have any water. And so, or they were experiencing drought. And what I realized was like, no, they have a lot of water, but they just didn't have a way to store the water, capture the water that was there, even during the dry season. Because as you know, dry season, the water's not going to flow as much, but it's still there. But how to capture the water that is present in a way so we're not disturbing the ecosystem, but we're able to utilize it to ensure that 25% of the main food and income source of the Karo weren't dying of dehydration. Exactly. So that was the original problem we went to go solve.
So at this point, I will share that you came back to the States and you were like on the mission, okay? And I witnessed it, of how you contacted all of your resources, University of New Mexico, also University of Hawaii, et cetera, Engineering Without Borders. And to me, it was fascinating to see you gather these resources. Like, it was unbelievable. But what was even more unbelievable is that you put in a temporary fix. So can you share about what you did in the interim until you were able to formalize some of these projects that you knew had to take place?
Yes, thank you. So I spoke with a friend of mine, Mark, and because he's from Oklahoma, you wouldn't think Oklahoma and Peru, but he grew up on a cattle farm, and in Oklahoma, they don't have a lot of water. So in speaking with him about his childhood and how they would drill wells and do all sorts of different types of water storage systems, in speaking with him, it gave me more ideas. So what I was able to do is I took these different types of ideas for water storage for cattle, because if you think about the alpaca and the llamas, but it's mainly the alpaca. They are the cattle for the Caro. So I spoke with Ruben and Barnaby, and I was like, hey, these are different ideas. Drilling wells wouldn't work to create like a well, because as you know, it's like slate rock, like hard rock. You cannot, you can't drill anything over there. It's just too hard. So that was out. So we were looking at different ideas, and I had presented one that I had sort of chatted about with Elisa and Ruben and Barnaby when I was up on the mountain. And I was like, hey, I noticed that there were already some spots in the mountain where they had natural pools. And Elisa was like, yeah, we have all these sites that come out and they make these pools. And I'm like, well, couldn't we do something and utilize the natural pools that are there and just make it a little bit bigger? So that way we're not really impacting the environment that much. We're just enhancing what's already present. And so I presented that idea to Barnaby, who is the president of the Chua Chua Annex. And he and Ruben met with a local maestro. A maestro is an expert, so specifically an expert in like water in that area. And they went up the mountain, they looked around, and with the community, they decided on one particular spot where there was a sipe. And there may be several there, but there was one particular one. And the next thing I know, they're like, okay, the maestro said it's going to be about this much. It was a little under $1,900, which wasn't a whole lot. And I have to shout out to my friend Chris. He donated some money, about $2,000, and then he works for Sony. So Sony, thank you, Sony. Their matching program gave another $2,000. So I was able to send them the money, and Whole Earth wouldn't be totally broke because we literally work on a shoestring budget. And I was able to send them the money to pay for the maestro, get the materials. The community, they have what's called a FINA, which is an obligatory volunteer service, where it's sort of like the taxes. You know, we have to pay taxes here in the States in many places. Their version of taxes is you have to provide 3 days of community service, of physical community service, and that's how you pay for, you know, your taxes in the community. And so the community all got together, and I love it. Some of the ladies in their skirts, and they're out there with these pickaxes, and you know, I've got some videos that I'm going to share with you, Enolia, on that. And they're out there building the wall, and they ended up telling me that from that they had only about 200, I think it was 200 deaths of alpaca, but it wasn't from dehydration. So yay, we didn't lose any alpaca from dehydration, but unfortunately we lost them to starvation. So that this is the, because there isn't enough water to feed the grass that feeds the alpaca. So that's part of the next project that we're going to look at, but we'll talk about that a little later. But what was amazing to me was that the solution for the water building these dams was it came from the community. So first and foremost, it came from them, you know, just talking ideas, and they worked with the maestro. So they decided on what was best for them. You know, it was just conversations. They chose the solution. They found the maestro that would help them, and they did the work. And it was so successful that within like 6 months to a year, I can't remember the exact timing, Ruben was like, oh yeah, the community built like 3 more of them for the alpaca. I was like, whoa.
Wow.
So yeah, so somehow, I don't know, you know, look, fortunately, there are other good people out there in the world that support the Caro. Somehow, through connections that other members of the community had, they were able to get more money. I don't know how much, I'm not sure. I'm hoping that they were able to reuse some of the forms, which are the wood pieces that are used to dry the concrete. So hopefully they were able to reuse some of the material, so that lowered the cost for building the other walls. But they were able to build like 3 more dams, like small dams. So they created like 3 more ponds. So in total, I think they have 4 ponds for the alpaca. And then what Ruben told me, which I thought was really amazing, because he had said to me that the community had been wanting to create some sort of aquaculture up in the Andes, and
Right.
I don't really know much about aquaculture except fish. That's my knowledge of aquaculture. But they told me that somehow, and these are the little kids, and this is what's so amazing, where you provide opportunities for people, and then the adults, the children, everyone in there comes up with all these amazing ideas. And so what the kids ended up doing was they captured some fish from the I guess from the Rio Tuela, from the little river that runs by there. And apparently now some of the ponds, they've created like these mini aquaculture environments. And so now they're able to have fish, an extra source of protein. Excellent. For them up there. Yeah, and the kids are having fun with the fish, and the fish helps to, I guess, maintain the balance in the water. I don't know, the algae and the oxygen and all of that. So since the water still flows, you still have the oxygen going there, so you don't have too much algae buildup, but the fish help, and then they feed off the mosquitoes that may be at the top. I don't know if there's mosquitoes that high, but whatever bugs are high up, so they're able to maintain the water. And this water is mainly for the animals. It's not, at this point, not for human consumption. I know that the people in the community want to build a few more ponds that are mainly for human consumption. But for now, the ones that they have, I was like, wow, we started with one, and then that was what Whole Earth helped support, and then the people were able to expand it to continue to support their livestock, and I was really amazed. And then the kids throwing in the fish and created an aquaculture environment so they get more protein. So it was just amazing to see, like, oh wow. It's like
that's phenomenal. It got yeah, it's really, really phenomenal, because you were there to see from problem to resolution, and even with the temporary even though it's a temporary resolution, it's pretty permanent enough that it's a stopgap in the fact that their alpaca are dying from dehydration. Now, has it made an impact for the starvation also in that regard?
Well, we're working on that. I think we've addressed the dehydration issue, but this is where the irrigation. So we had a maestro take a look at the existing ponds, and I believe the large, so there is a large lagoon. So this is the main project that Whole Earth Engineering has reached out to Engineers Without Borders to help with. Our project have been placed on their open market. Engineers Without Borders has something called Volunteer Village, and there's an open market on there. So individuals that are part of either professional or student chapters of Engineers Without Borders can go onto the open market and see our projects. And the main project, one of the main projects we have there, is dredging the main lagoon, because over the years, all the sedimentation, everything has taken the lagoon from being more of a V, which allows evaporation to slow down, to more of a flat plate. And what this creates is it creates the impact of sunlight on the water. So when it's shallower, let's say this is the top of the water, this is the bottom. When it's shallower, then more water gets affected by the sun, so then the evaporation rate happens, and then the top of the water lowers. But if you have a cone, I don't have an extra hand, my chin is a hand. There you go. If you have a cone, then as the sun goes, the evaporation rate is still, affecting it, but you still have more water. The volume of water.
The depth of the water is less evaporative, and then per square meter, if you have everything at 1 foot versus depth of 8 feet, you're not going to evaporate 8 feet of water as you would 1 foot of water. So that makes perfectly great sense. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow. I love my mathematician friend here. She comes in and explains at meters. I'm the engineer, like, oh, like this, da, 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 and she brings in the numbers. So thank you. I'm the concept as the engineer, and my mathematician gives us the numbers. I love it. But yes. So what we were looking at with the irrigation project, we had the maestro take a look. I believe it was from the main lagoon, and how we can create how do you call it? I guess irrigation is what you call it. How you create irrigation. I think we were looking at like potentially like drip type irrigation. I don't know. This again, now we're moving into more agricultural engineering. So hence why we're looking for the professional Engineers Without Borders chapters, because you know, as people will learn through this in our discussions, there's many types of engineering. And
Yes.
I
Well, I have a
right.
question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it that you're only looking with Engineering Out Without Borders? Would you welcome other engineers to enter in this project with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I did an application with Ruben and we applied for Engineers Without Borders because we're looking for any engineering group, any sponsors, any people willing. We're even, if people are willing to donate resources, we can even hire, because I know Ruben's got a local group of engineers that have their own company in Peru that he went to school with. They're willing to help us, but the thing is, because they're a private entity, we would need resources to pay them to do
Okay.
that. So yeah, so and even through Engineers Without Borders, what they do is they would help with fundraising, and if we can get a match on that, you know, so anything with money, because then we can either go through Engineers Without Borders or any other engineering group, or if people want to fund the project, then we can hire like direct engineers from Peru, which we have a few civil engineering organizations that are Peruvian that we can give them the work to do. The thing is, we
Okay,
really
so I just want to
resources.
highlight this to our audience. Okay, so you hear that, you philanthropic engineers, those who want to help community in Peru, in the high Andes, we are welcoming and our arms are wide open to help for
The Caro, yeah,
to help and assist the Kiro in their homeland, specifically the Chua Chua village, to assist them to save their alpaca, which in turn saves lives. So
yes,
please, 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 if this interests you, if you're an engineer, if you're philanthropic looking for a worthy cause, I can't highlight enough how much of a worthy cause this is. And a lot of due diligence has been done. And so you've been sharing with us about the project, but I want you to also share just a little bit about the research that was done, because you didn't come to work with the Caro and they just decided, oh, we'll do this. There was a lot of research that was done in background before they deduced that this is what the best result and process that they wanted to go through, that the community could do together, before they made that decision.
yes,
So will you comment a little bit on that?
absolutely. Well, I'm going to give a shout out to Abel Cruz from Peruano Sinagua, because he has a world-renowned nonprofit that focuses on water technologies. So he and his organization, they came out and spent some time up there. At first, we were looking at his fog catcher technology because they're up so high in the clouds. And then we looked at a few other different types. I think he has about 9 different types of technology with his engineers out in Peru as well. And he's applied his technology like in Dubai. And I know he was telling me that last year around this time in December, that he had a conference out in California, in Southern California, looking at their drought to try to implement this. So we were fortunate that Abel's organization, Peruano Sinagua, went out and took a look at the area, and they did a lot of the calculations. And he's the one who taught me about cone versus flat plate. So I got to give him props for that, for the knowledge, because again, I'm not a hydrologist
Right.
or hydrological engineer, again, another type of engineering. So they generously donated their time and the resources to travel up to the community in order to do those studies. And it turned out that for us, the technologies that he focused on, which please don't ask me to name all 9 of them because I don't remember, but the technologies that he specifically utilized for water capture now weren't necessarily what would be the most feasible financially or in terms of maintenance for the community. So we ended up like, okay, you know, thank you for coming out and donating your time and your resources. But we ended up, you know, moving along. And then that's when, you know, like I said, I spoke with my friend Mark Fox, And so shout out Mark, he does environmental restoration. That's his background, mainly for like contaminated, fields and all that. But he has a lot of knowledge when it comes to hydrological systems, because again, he grew up on a cattle farm / ranch in Oklahoma where there is scarcity of water. So from his own personal knowledge and his background in environmental restoration, I was able to capture some of that knowledge and then pass that along to the Kiro. So, but ultimately, we also had an engineer. This is again the civil engineering organization that Ruben is connected to in Peru. They came out and did some surveys of the lagoon, and this is where Fred and Chelsea Maxick. So I will say thank you to them for that. They paid for that survey to come out, and for the engineers, this was the civil engineers. Now again, another type of engineering. We're gonna have a quiz for people. How many different types of engineers do we mention at the end of this talk? No, but I think it's good, because I think a lot of people don't recognize like actually how many different types of engineers and all that it takes to actually create something. So the surveys, the civil engineering surveyors came out and they looked at the lagoon and figured out the volume of water that would be necessary and how they could, potentially build up more of a dam along the main lagoon, because that one has 3 sipes, and how much volume it can contain, and how much would be needed for the population and the alpaca. So yeah, there was a lot of analysis that was done, and we ended up doing the smaller lagoons mainly due to financial constraints, because to be able to do the dredging and build up the wall, it was going to be about $100,000, because we have to transport, because they're up at like 14,768 feet above sea level. So we're looking at very high. So we're looking at, so a lot of the cost is the transportation and the logistics of getting not only the equipment and the people, that are experts up there. So that costs a lot of money. And then possibly because there's no heating. And I think in the last chat that we had, I mentioned how I had 5 hot water bottles all around me. This is extremely cold.
We shared pictures.
Yes, it's extremely cold, and the conditions are very, very rustic. So yeah, so you definitely need, hardy, adventurous people that really like high altitude and adventure, and have that technical knowledge to be able to go up there. Or if they're not willing to, then we would have to, find a way to transport them from the community down to Paucartambo, which is about 4 hours down the mountain. But, that's a huge, that's an 8-hour day round trip.
Yeah, that's it. It's the Portocumbo is that in between town between Cusco and the Quero villages. So yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the logistics and the equipment and getting all of that, and even creating like a lay down area up there, all of that is going to cost a lot of money. So most of the expense is from that. So if there are any engineering organizations, even private organizations that want to try out their new technology, be willing to have that, and they'll have the labor, because the people really want to create the solutions and they want to be part of the solution for their water needs. And
so
yeah,
you shared a lot. I'm going to stop us here so that we could save a little bit for part 3, and just that way we can cover the bigger project in a little bit more detail. But thank you. That saves lives. If you haven't listened to this, Dr. Linda Tello here sharing with us the engineering projects that are happening for the Quero to save their alpaca, and in turn, it impacts the village in the most positive of ways so that it can save lives. So thank you so much for sharing about this engineering. Thank you for the projects that you did. Thank you for the solicitation of gleaning the resources and the interest to get people started so that the community could actually do their tentative project so that a permanent one can eventually be put in place. So grateful for people like yourself, Dr. Linda Tello. I can't even begin to tell you how it's just so meaningful. And there are many people that the Kiro have impacted, you know,
Mhm.
we're part of their lineage, okay? And there are many who study and are part of the lineage of the Kiro. So if you're one of those people, this is a give back. And it would be great if you took the time to take a look at wholeearthengineering.org. Dr. Linda Tello, your monies will go directly back to the Kiro. Or if you look at expressionsofhumanity.org, we are sending Kiro children to school. And that's where the monies will go that way. And so is Whole Earth Engineering. But I'm giving you.
Well, I just wanted to say we're actually moving our website domain from wholeearthengineering.org because one of the things being an engineer, sometimes we're practical, sometimes we're not, but I realize after a while spelling all that is really hard for a lot of people, including myself. So we're moving over to the domain WEE Inc.org. So We Inc., which is still Whole Earth Engineering Inc., but .org, and a lot shorter. So that we're moving our new website to that. And when it's finalized, then if you prefer to spell wholeearthengineering.org out yourself, and eventually it will kick you over to the new domain of weinc.org. But
And we'll
yeah,
keep
so
it
if you
posted. We'll flash it right
yes,
across the screen.
exactly. Yeah, and it's still in progress. So if you happen to look at it now, look at it again next week, because yesterday I spent like an entire day. I finally got to it because I have a whole nother job besides this. Eventually, I would love to do this full time, like you do, Enolia, with all of your work. But until then, I took an extra day off for the holiday yesterday, and I worked on the website because I want people to understand that Whole Earth Engineering Inc. is a nonprofit engineering company. Because I did have one friend of mine who commented, and he was like, "Oh, I didn't realize it was nonprofit, because when I see engineering, I don't automatically think nonprofit." And yes, one of the things that I have learned is that there are very few nonprofit engineering companies in the world. But for me, this was so important because what I'm seeing is that not only indigenous communities, but also rural communities, and eventually I'd like to do that as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be an indigenous community, but a rural community. Like, everybody needs infrastructure.
Everybody.
Water, roadway, housing, sustainable energy systems. Everybody needs that these days. And even with the Kiro, what I find super amazing, and how I love the integration of the science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, aka STEAM, is that when I went up to the Kiro community, you see all the little kids running around with their cell phones, and the grandparents with their cell phones, and and Barnaby, I don't know how he did it, but he had a huge satellite system on top of his adobe house. And so to me, when people are like, "Oh, you're ruining the culture," and I'm like, no, they are 21st century people just like we are. So just like we want the latest of something, they may be up at 15,000 feet above sea level, but they go back and forth from Cusco. They see what's happening. And like I said, they're 21st century people. It's just their lifestyle is definitely more rustic, so they're closer to the earth, but it doesn't mean that, they don't want to, Google the latest TikTok dance.
What's that? Also, exactly.
Yeah. And all the little 13-year-old girls are like, "Oh, look at my TikTok dance up there," and they want to make their own TikTok. I mean, they're kids just like anybody else. So it's amazing how then what the people can do with the technology infrastructure, they use it to preserve their culture and advance their culture how they want, just like any of us use the technology we get to emphasize the things that are important to us.
Exactly. And I just wanted to share that expressionsofhumanity.org or expresshumanity.org is the actual URL to access Expressions of Humanity. Our project is to send children to school, send the Kiro children to school at this point. We're focused there right now. So yes, I'm going to say thank you again. Any last words you want to say before we sign off?
No, I was just thinking Enolia's cutting me off because she knows I'll go into other stories. So I'll save them for the next one.
We'll save it for the next one. We have so much to unpack and so much because I haven't even gotten to the point where like I want to talk about cosmology, a little bit of everything. So we're gonna have fun. We're gonna have lots and lots of
Yeah, I need to share like one little thing that Andres, when we get to the cosmology one, that he taught me about the stars, and I was like, whoa, it was so cool. So
yeah,
we'll
it's gonna be really cool.
leave them on a what do they call it, cliffhanger.
Yes, yes, yes. So thank you again. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for opening your heart and your arms. And again, if you're philanthropic engineering firm, please contact Dr. Linda Tello at wholeearthengineering.org or weeinc.org. She'll be happy to respond. And so will I.
Yeah.
Thank you again. And we'll
Thank
have
you,
all of that
Enolia.
information in the description here on YouTube. So thank you again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.